I mean, the star of the prodigal son is not the prodigal son. He's just not. He's just what's called in the gaming world an NPE, non-playing NPC, non-playing character. You know, in the game where you got the guy that's working by, and he just goes back and forth and nobody's controlling him. That's the prodigal son just adds life to the story. But it's really the brother. And so the way we get into this is, it says, then all the tax collectors. Now, tax collectors had a bad reputation, and maybe deservedly so. Matthew was a tax collector before he followed Jesus. But what they did, and you can understand, I mean, it was the easiest way for the Romans to gather taxes from the Jews is to hire somebody, well, actually contract somebody and say, here's how much money we expect to get out of this region. So you pay us this much money, and then you collect and get whatever kind of profit or whatever you want. You collect back, and that money that you collect is your money because you've already paid us. Well, you know, people are complaining because the other day I was at Walmart and 18 eggs were $8.18. Now, okay, I mean, I didn't buy eggs. Bought them the other day when they were cheaper somewhere else. I forgot. And there's only 2 of us, so eggs last us a long time. But, so somebody says, well, there's price gouging going on. What's going on is capitalism. And sometimes there's price gouging. But in this case, eggs are scarce because, I guess, of bird flu. And they killed hundreds of thousands of chickens. And there's no question about which came first, the chicken or the egg, because we got no eggs because there are no chickens. So it must be the chicken came first. And that's not price gouging, though. But these tax collectors, they were, as far as the Jews were concerned, they were gouging the people. Now, they had the law on their side. They could come up and say, you owe $200. And they'd say, well, last year it was just $100. Well, this year it's $200. And you had no choice. Now, here's the weird thing about that. They were Jews that became tax collectors by doing a deal with the Romans. And so, therefore, tax collectors were hated. Now, today, tax collectors are just plain old people among us. My uncle was an auditor. He audited Ashland Oil in Kentucky. He audited Ashland Oil for years. That was his job for many, many years. He had an office that they gave him in Ashland Oil. And he would go through and say, should have paid more here, more here, more here, more here. Then he'd get with their attorneys who were just a few offices down. They'd go to court and they'd battle it out. And he'd get more money out of Ashland Oil than they wanted to pay. Which my uncle, being an auditor for the Internal Revenue Service, caused some dilemma with my stepmom, because she got so worried. We went to visit one time, and she said, "I'm just so worried." She said, "I did some sewing for some friends, and they paid me in cash, and we didn't claim it. And your uncle, he's going to see that. He's going to see that we didn't do that, and we're just afraid that we've put him in a tough position. You know, he might have to do something about it." Over like $40 worth of sewing, when he's getting millions and millions and millions auditing Ashland Oil. People are scared of tax collectors. You know, I'm scared of tax collectors. If you ever make a mistake, you get a letter from them said you owe us this much. If you don't pay by such and such, we're taking your house. I mean, they don't beat around the bush. They just we're gonna attach everything you own. We're gonna ruin you. And so they're not pleasant people. And when they make a mistake, you still got to prove that it's not your mistake. So tax collectors have a bad rap. But imagine if you know that the tax collector has already paid a sum of money for the privilege to collect your taxes, and that he's looking to make a profit. Basically, he's got the law on his side, and he's going to get as much money from you as he wants to. Well, you can see why the tax collectors in Jesus' day were hated. As a matter of fact, they were just counted as unclean. And so all the tax collectors and the sinners, which to the Pharisees, anybody that wasn't one of them was a sinner, they drew near to him to hear him, to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes complained, saying, "This man," talking about Jesus, "receives sinners and eats with them." Now, talk about what many would call as maybe racist. The Jews back then would have nothing to do with unclean Gentiles or unclean Jews who weren't like them, observant like them, or people who collected taxes even though they were Jews. So these were people that were Jews but not Jewish enough. Now, by the way, there are 3 parables here in chapter 15, and all 3 of these parables spring out of this incident right here. So it's important to know that these Pharisees and scribes, which were the lawyers among them, these Pharisees and scribes are just outraged that Jesus, who they think aspires to be like them, he didn't, but he's a rabbi, and they're just outraged that Jesus is having a meal with these common folk, these sinners, these tax collectors, because they had their own rules. So this chapter is about 3 things lost but diligently sought. The first parable is 1 out of 100 sheep is lost. If you got 100 sheep and one wanders away, do you leave the 99 sheep and go find the one sheep? Sound like a judgment call to me, but anyway, that's the first parable, and it kind of eases into this 3 parable suite here. And then we got the 1 out of 10 coins is lost. Now these were like a day's wage. These drachmas were, I go to a place, when I go places I ask how much the people make. I'm not supposed to do that, but old people get a lot of latitude on asking. And I find that folks working at like fast food, they make about $11 an hour, and yet they're always looking for a different job to make more. Because you can make more, but the people that I've asked probably couldn't make more. So now they work 12-hour days back then. A 12-hour day. So 12-hour day, $11 an hour, a lot of money. What if you lost it? What would you do? Well, if I lost like $125 or so, I'd look for it diligently, wouldn't you? I'd be looking for that. So that's the second parable. The third parable is the prodigal son, which the prodigal son is not the star of the parable. He just happens to be a non-playing character. So it's a subtle transition to that parable, which Jesus spends the most time on. And the other 2 are just kind of gimmies, but this last one, it's kind of explosive when it gets. So let's look at the first one very quickly. The first one is the lambs missing. So he spoke this parable to them, saying, "What man of you having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one which is lost until he finds it. And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. So the sinners, by the way, the lost sheep, got to get it. This whole thing means nothing unless you understand the sinners are equivalent to the lost sheep here. So you got to find that lamb. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I found my sheep which was lost. I say to you likewise that there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over the 99 just persons who need no repentance." Now, let's qualify the word just persons. He's making a parallel to these Pharisees who had a self-justification. They weren't really just. They were of their father the devil, whited sepulchres, and they were a generation of vipers, what they were. Jesus said that about all of them. But for the sake of this parable, let's call them righteous, because they thought they were righteous. And he says there's joy in heaven over one sinner that repents. Well, if you see the cast here, those 99 represent the Pharisees. That one represents those sinners that the Pharisees are so critical of. Lost thing, parable number 2, a coin is missing. Or what woman having 10 silver coins, a drachma, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls her friends and neighbors together, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I found the piece which I lost." So, did you ever lose something really expensive? You know, you'll go to great extremes to find it. And aren't you happy? It's like you got it all over again when you find it after having lost it. Likewise, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So the Pharisees can identify to finding a lost coin, which implies that these sinners have value, but I'm not sure the Pharisees are getting the whole gist of things at this point, because he's got this opportunity to preach to them. Now, he could have just started out and say, "You guys are a bunch of filthy, rotten sinners." But it's more fun. Just guess who's in this parable. Just guess the characters. Well, this is all a build up to the third parable, which starts out innocent enough because everybody loves a good story. So here's that third parable. Now, the point is almost always missed with regard to the lesson of the parable. It's called the parable of the prodigal son. It really should be the parable of the prodigal son's brother, the mean brother. And he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger son said to his father, "Father, give me the portion of goods that fall to me." So he divided them to his livelihood. Okay, fair enough. Goes ahead and gives the younger son his inheritance, and lets him go because he wants to go. So the younger son is not the star of this story. The Pharisees are represented here by the older son. The Pharisees who were critical of Jesus for eating with sinners and tax collectors. They're the stars of this parable. But they don't even appear in the parable till down toward the end. Jesus knew how to tell a parable, didn't he? They wouldn't have stayed if they realized that they were getting such a bad rap in this whole parable thing. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. You're probably thinking, living at home, not as bad as I thought it was. I joined the Marine Corps out of spite against my parents. Dad told me to leave, but there was that. But if I'd have just, showed a little bit of sorrow, he would have let me stay. But but I wanted to get even. So I joined the Marine Corps. And I joined the Marine Corps on a Saturday, and 1 week later, on a Friday, I was gone. I mean, I standing on those yellow footprints. And met some very inhospitable people. I mean, I thought it was, unreasonable, and they would tell me what to do at home. I got in the Marine Corps and realized what unreasonable really looks like. And, several of you were in boot camp. Some of the stuff they tell you to do is just stupid. But it's to build character. I think they kind of go overboard on that. I've never been on my own like this prodigal son right here. I went from my parents' house to under the supervision of the Marine Corps. I way wasn't on my own there. And I went from the Marine Corps, and before I got out of the Marine Corps, I got married. And I can tell you, I sure haven't been on my own since then. So I've never had a point in my life where there wasn't somebody I had to answer to. I don't even know what that's like. So this prodigal son, he leaves, he's got money, he's got time, and he goes into a far country, but he wastes his money. And he's probably thinking, well, living at home was better than I thought it was. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. Now, to the Jews, then, now, and forevermore, swine are nasty. You don't mess with swine. You don't touch them. You sure don't eat them. So here he is. Now, by the way, this is a made-up story. So Jesus throws in the prodigal son. He's out there feeding swine, and these Pharisees are going, they're just grossed out by the mere suggestion. So here he is, feeding swine. Obviously in Gentile territory, because Pharisees and they would not at all abide with a Jew having a pig trade. And so this prodigal son would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate. And no one gave him anything. Not a very good employer, by the way. I mean, just say it, not. Use your imagination like I did with that picture. That's hungry. I mean, a Gentile wouldn't be eating hog food. I have fed hogs at my grandmother's farm. Those animals are not picky about what they eat. I mean, they'll just eat anything, and they get fat off of it. And one time my grandmother, we went on a weekend, and my grandmother killed a hog, took it and had it slaughtered, and they sent it back, and the family all got together, and they packaged the meat. My dad had a job, my stepmom had a job, my grandmother had a job, and I had a job. My job was to make the sausage. Had the grinder there, which was kind of cool, technology. And they kept bringing me things to put in the grinder. I never wanted sausage for years after that. I mean, the stuff, I can tell you, the stuff that a farmer puts in the sausage, you don't want to see it made. And you've heard the saying, you know, if you see the sausage made, you won't eat it. Well, that's true. You won't. So the Pharisees, they're getting a disgusting story. And they're being told a story about a depraved condition of the son. And Jesus never actually said, I'm making this story up. As far as they know, it's the story of somebody. Well, it could have been. But Jesus didn't always base his parables on fact. It was a story with an object lesson. So these Pharisees had to be kind of impressed at this point, and they realized that this boy needs redemption. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have enough bread to eat and to spare? And I'm here perishing with hunger. So at this point, he says, wow, sure had it good at home. Which is exactly what I was thinking when I was in boot camp there. The first morning we were there, I hadn't eaten in like 18 hours because the way the meals worked out, we ate on the plane, then we didn't eat that night, and we were up pretty much till like 1 o'clock in the morning getting checked in, and then the next morning at 5 they woke us up and we went to the chow hall, and I had that cream beef over toast. And that was, yeah, I don't say that. It had a name. And that was the and that was the tastiest stuff. I'm going, this is fantastic. I could never stand it after that day. I mean, from then on, I tried another time. I liked this. One day of my life, I liked this. I mean, it was, but actually, the Marine Corps food wasn't that bad. You know, kind of liked it myself. That's when I realized that maybe my home cooking wasn't as good as I thought it was. So he's thinking now, you know, freedom from authority maybe is not what it was cracked up to be. I thought I would love this, being out on my own. And at this point, he realizes that he needs a plan. And he says, I will arise and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. What a great admission. And I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. Well, that'll tug a dad's heart right there, won't it? Especially if you practice and get it with a little quivering voice. You know, just lay it on. But he makes his great admission. He said the words anyway. It's a reasonable proposal. I mean, he gave up his inheritance. And really, if his dad's going to hire a servant, why not let it be me? And so this is a cry for mercy. And he arose and came to his father, but when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. I mean, what father wouldn't be just pleased to death to see something like that happen? The Greek word splagnidzomai is an interesting word because it's often the noun splagnizion is many times translated bowels of compassion. And you know when you get a queasiness in your stomach, or when you feel all things there, and so they have this terminology in Greek that compassion came from the bowels, and that's what that Greek word means. There's one happy dad though. Whatever he felt, he was a happy dad that his son had come home. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And sin, of course he had. Not worthy? Absolutely. Now remember who the audience is here. It's the Pharisees. So the Pharisees, they probably got a whole different take on this thing than we do. Because the audience, they have no concept of grace. Theirs is a religion of compliance. Was then, still is today. It's a religion of just doing what you're supposed to do. The mitzvot, the commands. 613 of them. Not just 10. 613 commands. And this is the way they roll, day after day after day, meticulously keeping these and bragging to each other about how well they have kept the mitzvot. They don't know anything about grace. And so the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it. And let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now is found. And they began to make merry. Well, now for the real lesson. Keep in mind, this parable is being given to these Pharisees and scribes, the meanest, legalistic, most despicable people as regard to compassion as you can imagine. So, Pharisees and scribes, they started up by saying, this man receives sinners and he eats with them. The mean Pharisee, I auditioned several Pharisees using AI. And I said, no, don't like that one, give me another one. No, don't like that one, give me another one. Kept asking. And finally I got to this guy and I said, I like this guy. This guy would be nobody's friend. This man receives sinners and eats with them. That's the way they started out. That was the basis. That's the reason Jesus gave this parable, because of the comment they made. So let's remember the scenario that caused Jesus to give this parable. It was the older son is not happy that his brother is back. Well, you know, there's one of the things that amuses me is the firstborn son and the secondborn son or thirdborn son or fourthborn son. They all complain that the older one picked on them. It's not always true. I mean, it's just not always true. Their perception. But this do-goody older brother, he probably said good riddance when the younger brother left. And now that he's back and he's wearing this ring and he's got this robe and they're having a party for him and they've killed a fatted calf, he is not happy at all, and he probably looked about like that. Now, his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. He's going to be tickled to see his brother again, right? Yeah, no. How is he the only one that didn't know what was going on? I mean, they've already arranged the party, and they're dancing, and he's coming in from the field. I mean, what kind of day did he spend in the field? Where was he all day? But he said to them, to him, the dead, your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. So it's party time. Your brother's safe and sound. That's good news, right? Well, he was angry and wouldn't even go in. Therefore, his father came out and pleaded with him. Now, keep in mind, this older son represents these reprehensible Pharisees that did not like to see Jesus entertaining sinners and tax collectors. So he's not really glad that his brother's back at all. So this anger from the brother, just like the Pharisees, and yes, jealousy. It's exactly what it was. So who does the Father represent here? Well, that'd be God, wouldn't it? or in this case, Jesus receiving them. So he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time. And yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. Now the older brother has point. Who gets the party? The one that deviated and came back. Who gets dad's attention? The one that deviated and came back. But as soon as this son of yours came, okay, now, he could be my brother, but I prefer to call him this son of yours, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots. I wonder how he knew. Did he write back home? And I think he's just assuming some things here. Did I mention that it's a parable? You kill the fatted calf for him. He calls him the son of yours. He wants to make sure his dad knows how bad he really was. And despite all of this, he gets a party. And he said to him, Son, you're always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad. For your brother was dead and is alive again, and he was lost, and now he's found. So here we go. The lost sheep that was found, the lost coin that was found, and the lost son that was found. The object in this parable is the elder son. He's the star. He's the villain, because the Pharisees and scribes resented commoners getting religion. Now, the point, the parallel, I think is probably pretty simple. There are churches today having servers right now who are browbeating their congregation into giving more money. And they're lying to them by saying, if you'll give more money, God will manifestly give you back 10 times the money that you give to the church. And I mentioned 3 or 4 weeks ago, because I just seen it, Jesse Duplantis, one of those prosperity giving preachers, said he believed the reason the Lord hasn't come back yet is because the people aren't giving enough. There are people in the ministry that are eloquent from the pulpit, that can really raise the roof when they're preaching, who are just in it for the prestige and the money. I know that's hard to believe. And one of the things that irritates me that politicians say is politicians are always saying the people are too smart to believe this. No, they're not. What people are you talking about? You know, we get our alignment, and we pretty much stick with our alignment. The wacko progressives, they admire people that are just wrong, but because they admire them, they just keep towing that line. And people are loyal till they're not. But people are loyal, and they'll just believe when they hear a preacher say something that impresses them. Sometimes it only takes like one message without knowing anything else that preacher preaches. Sometimes it'll be just one message that will just get them so excited that they will believe everything that preacher says from then on and won't question anything and just do everything he says. And the fact is there are a lot of preachers that don't really care for their people. It's just a profession. It's just a trade. Now you're probably thinking, well, that's rare. I don't think so. I think that's more common than not. But that's who these Pharisees were. They actually resented that Jesus Christ would be sitting with sinners and tax collectors because to them they were unclean and should not be given the time of day. That's what they believed. So this parable is really about those Pharisees. And you've heard me say that almost all the parables are attacks against the reputation of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes. Almost all of them. Not all of them, but almost all of them. Never lose compassion for the spiritually needy. You know, there's certain people that we dislike so much that we might completely neglect to minister to them. But Jesus teaches us here in this parable, never lose compassion for the spiritually needy. Let's stand together, please, with our heads bowed and our eyes closed.